$2.6 billion. That is what Sears Holdings paid in rent to its own former chief executive's hedge fund between 2005 and 2018. Not to a landlord, not to a stranger. To Eddie Lampert, the man running the company, through the real estate vehicle he controlled. In that same span, Sears Holdings as an operating retailer never generated profit remotely close to that figure. The building made more money than the business it was built to house. Sit with that before we go anywhere else. Here is the version of this story most people already believe, because it is comfortable and requires no knowledge of structured finance. Sears was an American institution, undone by Amazon and online shopping. Eddie Lampert, a hedge fund manager with no retail background, was brought in to fix it, failed, and presided over the slow, humiliating death of a company that once defined American commerce. Store by store, region by region, the lights went out. Analysts called it a case study in mismanagement. Business journalists called it a cautionary tale about hedge funds playing retailer. It is a clean story. It has a villain, a victim, and an inevitability to it. Technology killed the department store, and Lampert simply failed to stop the bleeding. Almost everyone accepts this version, because the alternative requires them to understand something most people are never taught. That ownership of the ground beneath a business can matter more than the business itself. Now invert it. Eddie Lampert did not fail to save Sears. He was never trying to. Go back to 2005, to the merger of Kmart and Sears. A deal engineered not by a retail strategist, but by a hedge fund manager who had already taken Kmart through bankruptcy and emerged holding its most valuable asset, the real estate. The retail chains were struggling, yes. But struggling retail chains sitting on prime real estate in thousands of American towns are not liabilities. They are undervalued vaults. The merger consolidated Kmart's and Sears. Heist's combined property holdings, thousands of parcels, much of it owned outright, much of it in locations retail analysts underestimated because they were only looking at sales per square foot, not land value beneath the concrete. Lampert was not building a retailer. He was building a holding company with a retail chain attached to it as camouflage, and the years that followed were not a turnaround attempt. They were an extraction plan executed with legal precision, in full public view, mistaken for incompetence because incompetence is easier to accept than intention. Here is the mechanism, and it is worth understanding in detail because it is elegant. In 2015, Sears Holdings spun off 266 properties into a new entity called Seritage Growth Properties. Lampert and ESL Investments took a controlling position in Seritage. Sears then signed leases to continue operating in buildings it had, days earlier, owned outright. This is the sale-leaseback. Sell the asset to an entity you control, then have the operating company pay rent back to that same entity, indefinitely, for the right to keep existing inside its own former property. Sears received an upfront cash injection of roughly $2.7 billion from the transaction. But the real value transfer was structural. Seritage now owned appreciating real estate free of retail risk, while Sears carried a new, permanent rent obligation on top of an already collapsing sales base. Simultaneously, ESL Investments, Lampert's hedge fund, was extending secured loans directly to Sears Holdings, the same company Lampert ran as chief executive. These loans were structured with senior priority in the capital stack, meaning if Sears defaulted or filed for bankruptcy, ESL's debt would be repaid before unsecured creditors, before suppliers, before, in practical terms, almost everyone else standing in line. This is the part that makes the architecture complete. Lampert was not simply a landlord collecting rent from a company he used to run. He was a senior creditor to that same company, holding secured claims that guaranteed his position regardless of outcome. Every store closure that followed functioned as a liquidation event that paid him on two separate ledgers at once. Rental income stopped being owed on shuttered locations that reverted to Seritage for redevelopment, and outstanding debt obligations moved him closer to the front of the repayment line as the operating company shrank. He did not need Sears to survive. He needed Sears to keep shrinking in an orderly, legally protected fashion. And it did, for over a decade, until the formal bankruptcy filing in 2018 made the arrangement official rather than functional. Now the cost, stated plainly, without sentiment, because sentiment is not the point here. More than 250,000 jobs were eliminated over the course of the decline. Pension obligations for tens of thousands of retirees were shifted onto the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, a federal backstop, meaning the public absorbed liabilities a private company had accumulated and then discarded. Small towns across the country that had built tax bases around a Sears or Kmart anchor store watched commercial corridors hollow out, sometimes permanently. Suppliers went unpaid. Unsecured bondholders recovered pennies on invested dollars. On the other side of that ledger, Eddie Lampert and ESL Investments retained control of hundreds of properties through Seritage, properties later repositioned as mixed-use developments, self-storage facilities, and strip retail, worth billions, and largely insulated from the retail collapse that had generated them in the first place. Select senior bondholders, protected by the priority structure, recovered value that unsecured creditors never saw. Real estate developers who later acquired positions in Seritage-controlled assets profited from land that Sears Holdings, the retailer, had essentially financed the redevelopment of through a decade of rent payments. Nobody broke a law. That is the part worth sitting with longer than the outrage. Widen the lens now, because this was never really about Sears. This is a blueprint, and it did not originate with Lampert, nor did it end with him. Identify a company sitting on undervalued hard assets, real estate, patents, distribution infrastructure, that the market is pricing based on a failing operating business rather than the value of what it owns. Structure the acquisition or control position so that the assets can be legally separated from the operating entity. Extract value from those assets through leases, licensing, or secured lending. Before the operating company's decline becomes terminal, let equity holders, employees, and unsecured creditors absorb what remains, because by the time the operating company expires, the assets that mattered have already left the building, sometimes literally. This pattern recurs across private equity roll-ups, distressed retail acquisitions, and leveraged buyouts still being structured today, in industries you would not immediately suspect, by people who understand a distinction most operators never grasp. The company is not the asset. The company is the vehicle used to reach the asset, and vehicles are disposable by design. Sears Holdings filed for bankruptcy in October of 2018. Seritage Growth Properties continued operating, redeveloping former Sears anchor sites into logistics centers and residential retail hybrids for years afterward, entirely independent of the retailer that had once justified its existence. The building outlived the business. It always does, when the building was the point from the beginning.